Silver Creek Vineyard, late October. The air smells of expensive perfume and old money, but all I can taste is copper and betrayal. My name is Elizabeth, and I am standing just beyond the manicured hedges of a wedding I funded but was forbidden to attend. Inside, my parents are toasting to a future bought with my broken bones. They think I'm at home crying in the dark. They don't know I'm holding the receipt that will burn their perfect world to the ground. Sometimes the only way to heal is to light the match. Join me as I take back what is mine. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The first time my dad slapped me, he didn't even bother to take off his tux. I was standing on the periphery of the Silver Creek Vineyard, a sprawling estate that smelled of lavender and old money. From my vantage point in the shadow of a massive ancient oak tree, I had a perfect view of the ceremony area. It was breathtaking, I had to admit. Rows of white Chiavari chairs were arranged with mathematical precision on the manicured lawn. The altar was a cascade of imported white hydrangeas and eucalyptus framing the rolling hills of the valley, bathed in the golden, syrupy light of golden hour. It was the kind of wedding that gets featured in glossy magazines, the kind where the napkins are linen and the champagne is French. It was perfect. And I wasn't on the guest list. I clutched the strap of my handbag, my knuckles turning white. Inside the bag, resting against my wallet and a pack of gum, was a thick manila envelope. It weighed only a few ounces, but it felt like I was carrying a slab of concrete. That envelope was the reason my stomach felt like it was full of broken glass. I watched the guests, arriving men in bespoke suits, women in silk gowns that shimmered in the sunlight. I saw a server walking by with a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres, looking efficient and invisible. I felt a strange kinship with him. We were both here to serve a purpose for this family, though he was getting paid and I was the one paying. That was the gut punch that made it hard to breathe. I looked at the flowers, the chairs, the string quartet warming up in the corner, and I knew exactly what they cost. I knew because it was my money that had paid for them. If you'd met my family 3 years ago, you'd think we were normal. You'd probably even like them. That's the trick, isn't it? Dysfunction doesn't always look like screaming matches and broken plates. Sometimes it looks like a Sunday roast and a shared pew at church. My dad was the hard-working small business owner, a contractor who built decks and remodeled kitchens and talked loudly about integrity. My mom was the perfect suburban matriarch, the woman who ironed sheets and baked cookies for the PTA, terrified that anyone might think we were anything less than ideal. And then there was Tyler, my brother, the golden boy, and me, Elizabeth. Growing up, I thought being the responsible one was a compliment. I wore it like armor. In our house, roles were assigned at birth and enforced daily. Tyler was the wild child, the charmer. He was the kid who could break a neighbor's window with a baseball and somehow walk away with a pat on the back and an ice cream cone because he had spirit. Teachers gave him passes on late homework because he made them laugh. Coaches loved him. My parents bailed him out of detention, paid his parking tickets, and laughed off his recklessness as boys being boys. I, on the other hand, was the rock. Mom and Dad loved to say that. Liz is our rock. We don't have to worry about Liz. It sounds flattering until you realize that a rock is just something you stand on to get where you want to go. I got love when I was useful. I earned my place at the dinner table by being the one who remembered birthdays, the one who covered Dad's office shifts, when his secretary quit, the one who tutored Tyler so he wouldn't fail math. I brought home straight A's, not because I was a genius, but because I knew that excellence was the rent I had to pay to be seen. I thought that if I was good enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, I would secure my place in the family unit. I thought loyalty was a two-way street. The dynamic shifted permanently when I was 23. I had graduated college and was working an entry-level job, grinding toward a future I hadn't quite mapped out yet. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. I was driving home from work, listening to a podcast, thinking about what to make for dinner. I entered an intersection on a green light. I never saw the truck. The police report said the driver was 3 times over the legal limit. He blew the red light at 50 miles an hour and T-boned my sedan on the driver's side. I don't remember the impact. I remember the waking up. I remember the sterile, sharp smell of the hospital rubbing alcohol and floor wax. I remember the pain, which wasn't a sensation but a whole world I was suddenly living inside. Shattered pelvis, 3 broken ribs, a compound fracture in my leg, a concussion that made the world tilt on its axis every time I opened my eyes. The recovery was a long, dark tunnel, 6 months of physical therapy, learning to walk again, the crushing weight of PTSD that made my heart hammer like a trapped bird every time I heard a car horn or screeching tires. I moved back in with my parents because I couldn't use the bathroom by myself. For a while, they were great. Mom brought me soup, Dad installed grab bars in the shower. I felt taken care of. I felt safe, because the other driver was drunk and ensured the lawsuit was open and shut. A year after the accident, a settlement was awarded in my name. It wasn't enough to buy a private island, but for a 24-year-old in a mid-sized town, it was a fortune. It was start a life, money. It was compensation for the pain, the scars, the lost year of my life. My lawyer, a stern woman named Ms. Halloway, had looked me in the eye when she handed me the paperwork. "Elizabeth," she said, "this money is your security. It's to make sure you're okay no matter what happens with your health in the future." I was still exhausted then. My body had healed, but my mind was tired. That's when my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. The lighting was warm. Mom had made a pot of coffee. Dad had a folder of documents and a serious protective expression on his face. "Liz, honey," Dad started leaning forward. "We've been talking. This settlement, it's a lot of money. And with the state you're in, with the stress of the recovery, we don't think you should be worrying about managing high-yield accounts or tax implications right now." "It's complicated, sweetie," Mom added, patting my hand. "Sharks out there will try to take advantage of you. We want to protect you." "I was thinking," Dad said, sliding a paper toward me. "We put it in a managed account. I'll co-sign just so I can handle the paperwork deal with the bankers. We'll lock it up in something safe. You won't have to lift a finger. It'll just grow until you're ready to buy a house or go back to school. You trust me, right?" I hesitated. I remember looking at the pen, then at the signature line. A small, quiet voice in the back of my head whispered, "No." It whispered that I was an adult, that this was my money bought with my broken bones. But I was so tired. And they were my parents. They had bathed me when I was in a cast. They had fed me. They were the only team I had. To say no felt like an accusation. It felt like betraying the people who had just spent a year nursing me back to health. "Of course I trust you," I said. And I signed. I told the reader in my head right then that I had a bad feeling, but I swallowed it. I sold out my own instincts for the sake of family harmony. I handed over the keys to my future because I wanted to be the good daughter one last time. Life moved on. I got stronger. I moved out of their house and into a tiny, drafty apartment on the edge of town. I took a job as an office manager at a logistics firm. It wasn't my dream job, but it paid the rent. I drove a 10-year-old Honda that rattled when it hit 60. I lived frugally, dreaming of the day I'd touch that money. My plan was simple: buy a small condo, maybe get a master's degree, start a small business. Every few months when I went over for Sunday dinner, I'd ask about the account. "How's it looking, Dad?" I'd ask while peeling potatoes for Mom. "Great, Liz, just great," he'd say, not looking up from the football game. "Better than the market, actually. I moved it into some bonds that are really performing. You're going to be set." "Don't you worry about a thing," Mom would chime in from the oven. "You just focus on work. That money is your safety net. It's there when you need it." I believed them. I let the lie comfort me. I walked around with the quiet confidence of someone who has a secret shield. I didn't mind the cheap apartment or the old car because I knew I wasn't really poor. I was just waiting. Then came the night Tyler got engaged. We were at an Italian restaurant, the whole family. Tyler had been dating Rachel for 8 months. Rachel was different. She came from the other side of the tracks, the side with the gates and the long driveways. Her family had serious money, old money, developer money. She was nice enough, but she existed in a world where budget was a theoretical concept. Tyler tapped his glass with a fork, grinning that lopsided grin that had gotten him out of trouble his whole life. "So," he said, grabbing Rachel's hand, "we have some news." Rachel held up her hand. The diamond caught the restaurant lights and practically blinded me. It was huge. "We're getting married." My parents lit up like it was the second coming. Mom actually shrieked. Dad was out of his chair, pumping Tyler's hand, looking more proud than I had ever seen him. "This is incredible," Mom gasped, already dabbing at her eyes. "Oh, Tyler, Rachel, we are so happy." I was happy too. At first, I hugged them both. I offered to help with spreadsheets and planning because that's what I do. I'm the logistics girl. But before the appetizers even arrived, the conversation shifted. It wasn't about love or marriage. It was about the show. "We have to do it at Silver Creek," Mom said, her eyes wide and intense. "The Vineyard. It's the only place that sends the right message." "That place is a fortune," I said gently. "And the waiting list." "We'll make it work," Dad interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "Rachel's parents are going to be there, her whole extended family. We need to show them who we are. We can't look like we're pinching pennies." "The dress," Mom continued, gripping Rachel's hand. "We need to go to the city. Designer. None of this off-the-rack stuff. And the band, we need that 12-piece orchestra the Millers had." I sat there sipping my water, listening to them casually toss around numbers that equaled my annual salary. They were talking about customized invitations, 5-course meals, open bars with top-shelf liquor. They were talking about a wedding that would cost $100,000 easy. And my parents, who constantly complained about the cost of groceries and gas, were discussing it as if they had a gold mine in the backyard. I watched Mom. She was glowing. She looked at Rachel, then at Tyler, and she looked like she had finally won the lottery. She turned to me, her eyes shining with a frantic, desperate sort of joy. "This is our big chance, Liz," she said, squeezing my arm. "To show everyone, to show Rachel's family that we belong. You're going to be so proud of us." A chill went down my spine, colder than the ice water in my glass. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "You're going to be so proud of us." I had no idea she meant it literally. I had no idea that the pride she was talking about was something she intended to purchase. And I certainly didn't know yet that I was the one footing the bill. The first red flag wasn't a siren, it was a mismatch in the math. In the weeks following Tyler's engagement, my parents' house transformed into a war room of high-end wedding planning. Every time I visited, the dining table was covered in glossy brochures for florists, caterers, and live bands. I sat there one Sunday listening to my mother agonize over the difference between champagne and ivory linens, while my father was on the phone booking a vintage Rolls-Royce for the couple's exit. They were hemorrhaging money. I knew my dad's business was steady, but it wasn't this steady. He was a contractor in a mid-sized town, not a hedge fund manager. At the same time, strange comments started slipping out. I mentioned that my car needed new tires, and Dad winced, muttering about how things are tight right now and gas prices are killing us. Mom complained that she couldn't afford to fix the downstairs toilet. It was a cognitive dissonance that made my head spin. We were too broke to fix a toilet, but rich enough to import peonies out of season. I decided it was time to stop waiting. The cognitive dissonance was making me anxious, and I needed to anchor myself in something real. I made an appointment with a mortgage broker. I found a small condo on the east side, nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom unit near a park. It was perfect. The broker, a nice guy named Steve with a coffee stain on his tie, ran my numbers. "You're in a great spot, Elizabeth," he told me, tapping his calculator. "Your credit is solid. With that settlement money for the down payment, you're pre-approved. We can lock in a rate today if you can show proof of funds." I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my chest. "No problem. I'll get the statement." I walked out of his office feeling lighter than I had in years. I sat in my car and dialed the bank where my settlement was held, the bank my father had insisted on because he knew the branch manager. "Hello, I'd like to check the balance on my account," I said, giving the teller my social security number and the account details I had memorized. There was a pause. The sound of keys clacking on the other end seemed to last forever. Ma'am? The voice came back sounding confused. I'm not seeing an active account under this number. I laughed nervously. That's impossible. It's a managed high-yield savings account. My father Robert is the co-signer. One moment. More typing. Then the voice returned flatter this time. I see it here. That account was closed 4 months ago. The funds were transferred out via cashier's check. The world stopped. The sound of the traffic outside my car window faded into a dull buzz. Transferred where? To a joint checking account under Robert and Linda. Looks like your parents, ma'am. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I just lowered the phone and stared at the dashboard. My hands started to shake, a fine tremor that rattled the phone against the steering wheel. I grabbed a pen and a napkin from the glove box and wrote down the date and time of the call. I felt like I was back in the accident, the moment right after impact, where you know you're hurt, but the pain hasn't registered yet. I drove straight to their house. It was a Tuesday evening. They were in the living room watching a reality show about house flipping. The normalcy of it made me nauseous. Mom looked up, smiling when I walked in, but her smile faltered when she saw my face. Liz, what's wrong? You look pale. I didn't sit down. I stood in the center of the rug, clutching the napkin. I went to the bank today. Or I called them. Dad muted the TV. He didn't look at me. He looked at the remote in his hand. Oh, they said the account is empty, Dad. They said it was closed 4 months ago. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Mom stood up, wiping her hands on her apron, her laugh shrill and forced. Oh, honey, don't be dramatic. It's just, we moved it. Better rates. You know how banks are with their fees. Where is it? I asked, my voice steady despite the thumping in my chest. Show me the new account. Log in right now. Elizabeth, Dad said, his voice taking on a warning tone. Calm down. We're handling it. There is nothing to handle. I shouted, the dam finally breaking. It's my money. It's for my leg, my medical bills, my house. Where is it? Dad stood up then, throwing the remote onto the sofa. We needed it for the deposit. The words hung in the air like smoke. The deposit, I whispered. For the wedding. It's a temporary loan. Mom interjected quickly, rushing to Dad's side as if to physically back him up. The venue required 50% down immediately, or we'd lose the date, and the caterer. Liz, you have to understand, cash flow is tight with the business right now. We'll put it back. You stole $200,000 to pay for a party. I stared at them, unable to comprehend the creatures standing in front of me. These weren't the people who raised me. These were strangers in familiar skin. It's family money, Dad barked, his face turning red. We kept a roof over your head while you were crippled up in bed for a year. We fed you, we drove you to therapy. We are a team, Elizabeth Tyler marrying into the Rachel family. Do you have any idea what that does for us? For my business, for your future. It opens doors for everyone, including you. I don't need doors opened, I screamed. I need my settlement. I was at a mortgage broker today. Mom's expression shifted from defensive to cold. She crossed her arms. You're being incredibly selfish, Elizabeth. You already survived the accident. You're healed. You're working. This wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event for your brother. Why are you trying to ruin it over money? I realized my pain was just a down payment to them, I thought. I realized that the metal pins in my hip were just currency they were waiting to spend. Why didn't you ask me? I asked, my voice breaking. If it was for the family, why didn't you just ask? Dad looked me dead in the eye. Because you would have said no. That was the line that did it. That was the knife twisting in the wound. They knew it was wrong. They knew it was theft. And they did it anyway because their desire for social climbing was stronger than their love for me. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I just left. The next day, I took the afternoon off work and sat in the office of a lawyer I found online, not the one who handled my accident, but a litigator. I told him everything. He listened, taking notes, his face unreadable. "It's theft," he said plainly. "Civil theft, conversion of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, since your father was a co-signer entrusted with management. You have a case, a strong one." "But," I asked, hearing the hesitation. "But suing your parents is brutal," he warned. "It will destroy the relationship permanently. It will take years. And if they spend the money before we get a judgment, you might never see it back. Paper trails help. Do you have any texts, emails, anything where they admit to taking it?" I told him I'd look. I left his office feeling sick. The conflict between the American ideal of individual rights and the deep primal programming of family loyalty was tearing me apart. I felt guilty for even thinking about suing them. I felt like the villain in my own tragedy. As the weeks went on, the silence from my family was deafening. I expected an apology or at least a negotiation. Instead, I got ghosted. The wedding planning ramped up into hysteria. I saw it on social media. My aunts posting about the bridal shower I wasn't invited to. My cousins posting photos of dress fittings. I waited for my invitation. I checked the mail every day, feeling like a pathetic child waiting for a birthday card that wasn't coming. One afternoon, my cousin Sarah called me. "Hey, Liz," she said, sounding awkward. "I was just wondering, what color are you wearing?" "For the maid of honor dress, Aunt Linda said you were handling your own outfit, but I wanted to coordinate." I gripped the phone. "I haven't been asked to be maid of honor, Sarah. I haven't even received an invite." "Oh," Sarah said. The silence stretched out, painful and thick. "Oh, I must have misunderstood. I gotta go." 2 days later, the text came. It was from Mom. "Sweetie, we've been talking. Things have been so tense lately with your outbursts about the money. We really want Tyler's day to be perfect and drama-free. We think it's best for everyone if you sit this one out. We can celebrate privately later when you're feeling more yourself. Hope you understand." I stared at the screen. I wasn't just being uninvited. I was being gaslit into believing my valid anger was a mental health crisis. "When you're feeling more yourself." As if demanding my stolen money was a symptom of insanity. Then a notification popped up. Tyler had loved the message in the group chat I didn't know I was excluded from. Mom must have accidentally sent it to me individually while forwarding it to him. Or maybe she wanted me to see his reaction, a thumbs up emoji, or a heart. It didn't matter, it was an endorsement. I put the phone down on my kitchen counter. I didn't cry. I think I had run out of tears. I felt something else settling in my chest, a cold, hard stone of realization. I wasn't just being stolen from. I was being erased. I was the inconvenient truth that didn't fit into their glossy new narrative. If I showed up, I was a reminder of the car accident, of the debt of the fraud. If I stayed away, they could tell everyone I was sick or busy and enjoy the champagne my broken bones had paid for. For 3 days, I spiraled. I wrote long, angry Facebook posts exposing them only to delete them before hitting publish. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I was the crazy one. Maybe families do share money. Maybe I was being greedy. Then I went to see my friend Jess. She was the one person who knew the whole story. I sat on her couch drinking wine, shaking. "If you let this go," Jess said, her voice hard, "you are telling them that you don't matter. You are agreeing with them." "I just want to look them in the eye," I said, weaky. "I want to go there and make them see me." "No," Jess said. "If you go, you can't half commit. You can't just stand there and look sad. If you go, you have to be ready to burn it down. Either let it go or make them own it." I thought about the thumbs up from Tyler. I thought about Dad saying, "You would have said no." I thought about the mortgage broker and the condo I couldn't have. "I'm going," I said. I spent the next week building my arsenal. I went back to the bank and demanded printouts of the transfer history. I printed the emails where Dad had promised the money was safe. I printed the text messages where Mom talked about the venue deposit matching the exact date of the withdrawal. I organized it all into a manila envelope. I didn't tell anyone else what I was doing. I put on a dress I already owned, a simple navy blue thing that was nice enough for church, but invisible at a black tie gala. I did my hair, I put on my makeup. On the day of the wedding, I got into my rattling Honda. I placed the envelope on the passenger seat. It looked so innocent there, just a packet of papers. I told Jess I wanted to look my parents in the eye. That was a lie. I realized as I turned the key in the ignition that looking them in the eye wouldn't change anything. They had looked me in the eye when they stole from me. They had looked me in the eye when they lied. I didn't want connection. I wanted the truth out in the open. I wanted the heavy, suffocating secret they had forced me to carry to be theirs to carry too. I merged onto the highway heading toward Silver Creek Vineyard. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful day for a wedding. The gravel crunching under the tires of my Honda sounded like gunfire in the hushed elegance of the Silver Creek driveway. I pulled up to the valet stand, sandwiched between a glossy black Range Rover and a vintage Jaguar. The valet, a kid no older than 19, looked at my dented bumper and then at me, hesitation written all over his face. I didn't wait for him to open the door. I stepped out, clutching my purse against my ribs, feeling the envelope inside pressing against my hip bone like a concealed weapon. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasting meat, and night-blooming jasmine. It was sickeningly sweet. I could hear the faint strains of a string quartet drifting from the main lawn Vivaldi. Of course. Dad hated classical music, but Mom would have insisted on it because it sounded rich. I walked toward the entrance, my heels sinking slightly into the plush red carpet runner. At the check-in table, two women in matching black dresses stood with iPads guarding the gates of paradise. One of them smiled, a bright professional expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Name, please." "Elizabeth," I said. "Groom's sister." She tapped on the screen, her manicured fingers scrolling down, then up, then down again. Her smile faltered. She leaned toward her colleague, whispering something I couldn't hear. The second woman looked at me, her expression shifting from welcoming to wary. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the first woman said, her voice dropping an octave. "I don't have an Elizabeth on the guest list. Are you sure you're at the right wedding?" It was a valid question. I was wearing a navy blue dress from Macy's that was 3 years old. My hair was pulled back in a simple bun. I didn't look like I belonged in a world where flower arrangements cost more than kidney transplants. "I'm sure," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "My parents paid for this event. Actually, that's not quite right. I paid for it. Trust me, I'm supposed to be here." The woman blinked, flustered by the flat certainty in my tone. Before she could call security or ask for clarification, I walked past the table. I didn't run, I just moved with the momentum of a freight train that had lost its brakes. I stepped onto the terrace. The scene before me was a masterpiece of deception. The sun was dipping below the Vineyard hills, casting long, dramatic shadows across the white linen tables. Crystal chandeliers hung from the branches of the ancient oaks, already twinkling in the twilight. It was beautiful. It was magical. It was a crime scene. I scanned the crowd. There were easily 200 people here. I saw my aunts and uncles, people who had held me as a baby, sipping champagne and laughing. I saw neighbors I had grown up with. And then I saw them. Mom was near the head table wearing a floor-length silver gown that shimmered like fish scales. She was laughing at something Rachel's mother was saying, her head thrown back in a pose of carefree delight. Dad was a few feet away holding court with a group of men in tuxedos, a Scotch glass in his hand, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. He looked proud. He looked solvent. They looked like good people. I thought the bitterness rising in my throat like bile. That's always the trick. I took a step forward, and that's when Aunt Carol saw me. She was standing near the bar, holding a plate of canapés. Her eyes went wide, her jaw actually dropping. She nudged my cousin, pointing. The ripple effect was immediate. A hush didn't fall over the room. It was too big for that, but a pocket of silence opened up around me and began to spread. Mom must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere. She turned, her smile still plastered on her face, and followed the line of sight. When she saw me, the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She said something to Dad, grabbing his arm with a claw-like grip. Dad spun around. His expression wasn't fear, it was fury. They moved toward me instantly, intercepting me before I could reach the main seating area. They flanked me like security guards, steering me sharply to the right, toward a secluded stone patio near the restrooms that was hidden behind a wall of tall hedges. "What the hell are you doing here?" Dad hissed the moment we were out of earshot of the main party. His voice was a low, vibrating growl. "We told you not to come." "I saw the text," I said, looking him up and down. His tuxedo fit perfectly. I wondered if he used my money for the tailoring too. "Sit this one out. That's what you said." "Then why are you here?" Mom whispered, her eyes darting toward the entrance of the patio, terrified that Rachel's parents might see us. "Elizabeth, please, do not make a scene. Not today. This is Tyler's day." "I'm not here to make a scene," I said, my hand tightening on my bag. "I'm here because you stole my settlement. You emptied my account to pay for this." I gestured vaguely at the opulent grounds. "I have every right to be here. I'm the sponsor." "We didn't steal it," Dad snapped, stepping into my personal space. He smelled of expensive scotch and fear. "We borrowed it. It's an investment in the family. We were going to pay you back." "When?" I asked. "When were you going to pay me back, Dad? After the honeymoon, after you bought a boat, you closed the account 4 months ago and didn't say a word. That's not borrowing. That's theft." "If you leave now," Mom pleaded, switching tactics to bargaining. She reached out to touch my arm, but I recoiled. "If you just go right now, we can sit down next week. We'll work out a payment plan. I promise. Just don't ruin this for your brother." "I want an apology," I said. "And I want a promissory note signed tonight. I have the papers in my car." "Are you insane?" Dad's face was turning a mottled purple. "You think I'm going to sign legal papers in the middle of my son's wedding? You ungrateful little—" "Ungrateful!" I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. "I gave up a year of my life to recover from an accident that almost killed me. That money was for my pain. And you spent it on appetizers." "You are selfish," Dad shouted, forgetting to whisper. "You've always been jealous of Tyler. You can't stand that he's happy and you're miserable." "I'm miserable because you robbed me," I shouted back. Dad moved faster than I thought he could. His hand lashed out a blur of motion. Crack. The sound was louder than the string quartet. It was a wet, meaty slap that echoed off the stone walls of the patio. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate and blinding, radiating from my cheek to my jaw. I stumbled back a step, my heel catching on a paving stone, but I didn't fall. I grabbed the cold stone wall to steady myself. I stood there blinking, tasting the copper tang of blood where my tooth had cut the inside of my cheek. Dad stood frozen, his hand still half raised, his chest heaving. He looked at his palm, then at me. He didn't look sorry. He looked annoyed that I had made him do it. "You push and you push," he muttered, adjusting his bow tie. "Go home, Elizabeth, before you embarrass yourself further." Mom didn't rush to check on me. She didn't gasp. She just looked at the doorway, ensuring no one had seen. "Fix your face," she hissed at me, "and get out." I touched my cheek. It was throbbing hot and tight. For a second, just one heartbeat, I thought about doing what they said. I thought about walking back to my car, driving to my empty apartment and crying into my pillow. It would be easier. I could go home and let them keep their fairy tale. I could let them win. But then I looked past them through the gap in the hedges. I saw the waiters pouring champagne. I saw the flowers. I saw the life that my pain had purchased. I thought about the nights in the hospital screaming silently so I wouldn't wake my roommate. I thought about the smell of rubbing alcohol. I thought about the mortgage broker telling me I was approved and the hollow click of the phone when the bank teller told me the account was empty. I realized I wasn't just paying for their wedding, I was paying for my silence. If I walked away now, I was agreeing that I was worth nothing. I was agreeing that I was just fuel for their fire. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock falling into place. "No," I whispered. I straightened up. I wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand. "What did you say?" Dad asked, stepping toward me again threateningly. I didn't answer. I sidestepped him. He grabbed for my arm, but I was faster this time. I ducked past him and walked out of the patio back onto the main terrace. "Elizabeth," Mom hissed behind me. "Elizabeth, stop." I didn't stop. I walked straight toward the main stage where the DJ was set up. The reception was just about to begin. The guests were taking their seats for the speeches. The DJ, a guy in a shimmer jacket, was tapping the microphone, checking the levels. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them, but my legs moved with a mechanical precision. I walked up the 3 steps to the stage. The DJ looked at me confused. "Miss, we're not quite ready for toasts." "It's okay," I said. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was too surprised to resist. I turned to face the crowd. The feedback whined for a split second, a high-pitched screech that made everyone look up. 200 faces turned toward me. I saw Rachel at the head table looking confused. I saw Tyler next to her, a glass of champagne halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening in recognition. And behind the crowd, I saw my parents sprinting from the patio, their faces masks of pure panic. I took a breath. "Hi," I said. My voice boomed over the speakers, echoing across the hills. "I'm Elizabeth. I'm the groom's sister. I wasn't invited tonight." A ripple of confused laughter went through the crowd. They thought it was a bit, a quirky intro. "Which is interesting," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "because I helped pay for all of this. Actually, I paid for most of it." The laughter died. The silence that followed was heavy and instant. "3 years ago, I was in a car accident," I said. I kept my tone conversational, factual. I wasn't screaming. I was just telling a story. "I was hit by a drunk driver. I broke my pelvis, my ribs, and my leg. I spent 6 months learning how to walk again. I received a settlement for that injury. It was for my medical bills and my future." I saw Dad pushing his way through the crowd, shoving a waiter aside. Mom was right behind him, waving her hands at the DJ to cut the sound, but the DJ was frozen, staring at me. "My parents, Robert and Linda." I pointed at them as they struggled through the tables, convinced me to let them manage the money, to keep it safe. They told me it was in a high-yield account. They told me it was growing. "She's drunk," Dad shouted from the middle of the dance floor. "She's not well. Cut the mic." I didn't flinch. I spoke over him. "I went to the bank last week to put a down payment on a condo. The account was empty. It was closed 4 months ago." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a physical sound, like all the air being sucked out of the tent. "They took $200,000. I said the number, landing like a grenade. "My entire settlement. And when I asked where it went, my father told me they needed it for the deposit, for this venue, for the band, for the flowers." "Elizabeth, stop!" Mom screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "You're ruining everything." "I'm not ruining it, Mom," I said into the mic. "I bought it. I should get to enjoy it, right?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I held it up. "I have the bank statements here," I said to the crowd. "I have the transfer logs moving the money from my trust to their joint checking account. I have the emails where they lied to me about the balance. If anyone is wondering if I'm drunk or crazy or making this up, feel free to check the math. The bank doesn't hallucinate numbers." The room was in chaos now. Rachel was standing up, her hand over her mouth, looking from me to Tyler to his parents. Her mother was standing too, looking like she was about to commit a murder. My parents had reached the edge of the stage. Dad looked ready to tackle me. A few of my male cousins stood up, blocking him, unsure of what to do, but sensing that violence was imminent. "You ungrateful bitch," Dad screamed, and the microphone picked it up perfectly. The crowd heard the venom in his voice. It confirmed everything I hadn't said. I ignored him. I turned slightly to look at the head table. I looked directly at Tyler. He was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked small. Tyler, I said. The name echoed. Did you know? The room went deadly silent again. All eyes swiveled to the groom. Did you know where the money came from? I asked. Did you know that your dream wedding was paid for with my car accident settlement? Tyler stammered. He looked at Mom, then at Dad, then back at me. He looked horrified, but there was something else in his eyes, guilt, not surprise. Guilt. He started, but the word died in his throat. He slumped back in his chair, burying his face in his hands. That was my answer. He might not have known the details, but he knew enough not to ask. He knew they couldn't afford this. He chose not to see it. The illusion was shattered. The golden boy was tarnished. The perfect family was exposed as a fraud. I looked back at the crowd one last time. I saw judgment in their eyes, not for me, but for the people in the satin and tuxedos who had preyed on their own daughter. I'm not here to ruin your marriage, I said, my voice dropping to a normal volume, intimate and tired. I'm here to stop pretending this is a happy family, that's all. I set the microphone down on the DJ's table. It made a dull thud. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't wait for security. I walked down the stairs on the other side of the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one said a word. People stared at me with a mixture of horror and awe. I saw Rachel's father glaring at my dad with a look that promised legal action. I saw my mother sobbing into her hands, not out of remorse, but out of humiliation. I walked past the cake that probably cost $2,000. I walked past the gift table. I walked out of the tent off the terrace and onto the gravel driveway. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely walk. My cheek was throbbing where Dad had slapped me. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I got into my Honda. I locked the doors. I sat there for a moment in the silence, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the rush of victory. It didn't come. If this was a movie, I would have pumped my fist in the air. I would have driven off into the sunset with a smile. But in real life, I just felt empty. I felt a profound, hollow ache in the center of my chest. I had burned it down just like I said I would, but I was still the one standing in the ashes. I started the car. The engine rattled loud and unrefined, cutting through the sophisticated silence of the Vineyard. I put it in gear and drove away, leaving my family and my money behind in the rearview mirror. The adrenaline that had carried me out of the Vineyard and onto the highway didn't fade slowly. It crashed. It left me all at once, somewhere around mile marker 40, leaving me shaking so hard I had to pull over into the parking lot of a closed gas station. I sat there in the dark, my hands gripping the steering wheel, gasping for air as if I had just sprinted a marathon. The silence of the car was heavy, broken only by the relentless, angry buzzing of my phone on the passenger seat. It vibrated against the leather, dancing toward the edge, lit up with names that used to mean safety to me. Dad, Mom, Tyler, Aunt Carol, Dad, Dad, Dad. I drove the rest of the way to Jess's apartment in a haze. I didn't want to go back to my place. I knew my parents had a key, and for the first time in my life, the thought of them waiting for me felt physically threatening. When Jess opened the door, I didn't say a word. I just walked in and collapsed onto her beige sofa, burying my face in a throw pillow that smelled like lavender and dog fur. Jess didn't ask questions. She locked the door, poured a large glass of red wine, and set it on the coffee table. Then she sat on the floor next to me and just waited. My phone continued its assault. Eventually, curiosity, or maybe masochism, won out. I picked it up. There were 14 missed calls, 7 voicemails, 32 text messages. I played the first voicemail. It was Dad. The timestamp was 10 minutes after I had left the stage. "You ungrateful little bitch!" His voice cracked through the tiny speaker, distorted by rage and background noise. I could hear a woman crying mom and the dull roar of a crowd in chaos. You humiliated us. Do you hear me? You are dead to me. Don't you ever come back to this house. You're done. The next voicemail was 20 minutes later. The rage had cooled into something colder, more manipulative. Elizabeth, pick up the phone. We need to do damage control. Rachel's father is threatening to pull the funding for the honeymoon. You need to come back and tell everyone you were off your meds. We can fix this if you just apologize and say you were confused. Call me. I felt a wave of nausea. He didn't care that he had hit me. He didn't care that he had stolen from me. He only cared that the mask had slipped. Then came the texts from Mom. They were a masterclass in guilt. How could you? Tyler is devastated. You ruined your brother's happiest day. After everything we've done for you, after we nursed you back to health. Is this how you repay us? By destroying our reputation. I stared at the words, waiting for the familiar pang of shame, the instinct to fix it, to smooth things over. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity. They're not mad that they did it, I told Jess, my voice raspy. They're mad that I told people. They're mad because you took away their power, Jess said, handing me the wine. Drink. You look like a ghost. I scrolled through social media. It was a mistake, but I couldn't help it. The algorithm was already doing its work. A few guests had posted vague, scandalous updates. Wedding of the century just turned into the drama of the century. Hashtag Silver Creek, hashtag Family Feud. Never seen a bride cry that hard. Yikes. Remind me to never borrow money from family. I saw a photo of the empty stage where I had stood. It felt surreal, like looking at a crime scene photo where I was both the victim and the perpetrator. Then Tyler's name popped up on my screen. He wasn't calling, he was texting. You ambushed us. That was it. 2 words. Not, I'm sorry. Not, is it true? Just an accusation. I typed back, my fingers flying across the glass. I didn't ambush you. I told the truth. There's a difference. He replied instantly, the 3 dots dancing mockingly. You could have handled this privately. You humiliated Rachel. Her parents are screaming at Mom and Dad. You burned the whole family down, Liz. My life was burned down 3 years ago, I wrote back. Weren't you paying attention? Or were you too busy enjoying the lifestyle my settlement paid for? He didn't reply. The silence that followed felt like a door slamming shut between us. He wasn't the innocent bystander I had hoped he was. He was a beneficiary. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on Jess's guest bed, staring at the ceiling fans spinning in the dark. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's hand coming toward my face. I heard the slap. I felt the sting. But more than that, I felt the crushing weight of the realization that I had been sacrificed. I wasn't their daughter. I was an asset they had liquidated to buy their way into a higher tax bracket. I had been erased from their narrative so completely that my only way back in was to break down the door. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. I expected silence from the extended family, the kind of shunning that happens in small towns when you break the social contract. But around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Aunt Carol. She was Dad's older sister, a no-nonsense woman who ran a bakery and had never really liked Mom's pretensions. I hesitated, then answered. Hello. Elizabeth, she said. Her voice wasn't angry, it was tired. Are you safe? I'm at a friend's. I said, my throat tight. Good, don't go home. She paused. I just wanted you to know. You have a bed here if you need it. And I wanted to tell you that you weren't crazy. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. You believe me. Honey, I saw the way your father looked when you held up those papers, she said dryly. And I saw the bruise forming on your cheek before you went up on stage. I've known Robert my whole life. He's always cared more about looking like a big shot than actually being one, but stealing from his own injured child. That's a new low even for him. Everyone hates me, I whispered. No, Carol said firmly. The people who matter don't hate you. They're shocked. But the truth has a funny way of settling. Rachel's parents left the reception immediately after you did. Took the bride with them. It was chaotic. A lot of people walked out. She told me the gossip was spreading like wildfire. In a town like ours, reputation is currency, and my parents had just declared bankruptcy. Customers were already canceling contracts with Dad's business. People were asking pointed questions. The perfect family image they had spent decades curating had shattered in under 5 minutes. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. I had sent him an email the night before updating him on what happened. "Well?" he said, his tone professional but with a hint of awe. "That's one way to handle discovery." "Did I ruin my case?" I asked. "On the contrary," he said. "Public shame is a powerful motivator. I received a call from your father's attorney this morning. They want to settle. They want to avoid a lawsuit that would put those bank statements into the public record officially. They're offering a repayment plan." "I don't want a plan," I said, feeling the steel return to my spine. "I want my money. All of it." "We'll push for a lien on their property," he assured me. "After last night, they don't have much leverage." The days that followed were a blur of emotional turbulence. I found an apartment, a small studio that smelled of paint and freedom. I went to work ignoring the whispers of my coworkers who had heard the story. I kept my head down. But the hardest part wasn't the legal battle or the gossip. It was the internal crash. I kept wondering if I was the villain. I replayed the scene at the wedding over and over. The look on Tyler's face. The way Mom sobbed. Was I vindictive? Was I cruel? I sat in my new empty living room eating takeout on the floor, and I wrestled with the logic of it. If telling the truth makes me the villain, I said to the empty room, then maybe I was never really their daughter. I was just their liability. They had treated me like a broken appliance that they could scrap for parts. They had taken my pain, the money that represented my broken bones, and turned it into centerpieces and champagne. They had tried to erase me from the guest list, from the family photos, from existence, because I was inconvenient. I realized then that I hadn't destroyed the family. The family was already dead. I had just held the funeral. A week after the wedding, I took a step that felt small but monumental. I walked into a new bank, a credit union on the other side of town, one where nobody knew my father's name. I sat down at the desk of a young woman named Sarah. "How can I help you today?" she asked brightly. "I'd like to open a checking and savings account," I said. "In my name only, no co-signers, no joint access." "Of course," she said, typing away. "And will you be making an opening deposit?" I reached into my bag and pulled out my paycheck. It wasn't much. It certainly wasn't $200,000, but it was mine. "Yes," I said. As I signed the paperwork, I watched my own hand moving across the page. The last time I had signed a bank document, I had been in a wheelchair, high on painkillers, trusting the people who were supposed to protect me. This time my hand was steady. My signature looked sharp, angular, defiant. I walked out of the bank into the bright afternoon sunlight. I checked my phone. There were no new messages from Mom or Dad. I had blocked them. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was too heavy for that. It was the feeling of gravity shifting. For 27 years, I had orbited my parents and my brother, adjusting my trajectory to keep them comfortable. Now, for the first time, I was standing on my own planet. The air was thin and it was lonely, but the ground under my feet was solid. I got into my car, my rattling dented Honda, and drove toward my new apartment. I drove past the turnoff for my parents' neighborhood, and I didn't even tap the brakes. I kept going, the road stretching out in front of me, empty and terrifying and completely mine. 8 months later, the morning sun hit my face, not through the filtered light of a Vineyard oak, but through the sliding glass door of my third-floor apartment. I sat on a folding chair on the balcony, a balcony that was barely big enough for the chair, and a dying spider plant drinking coffee from a chipped mug. The view wasn't rolling hills or manicured hedges. It was a parking lot and the brick side of a bakery that smelled like yeast and burnt sugar every morning at 400 a.m. It was the most beautiful view I had ever seen. Inside the apartment was a work in progress. A flat-pack bookshelf lay in pieces on the living room rug, a jigsaw puzzle of particle board and Allen keys I planned to tackle later. I had a job I actually liked, coordinator for a nonprofit that helped adults go back to school. It didn't pay a fortune, and it certainly wouldn't impress the ladies at my mother's church, but it was honest work. I didn't have to lie to anyone. I didn't have to pretend to be someone else. My phone buzzed on the small metal table beside me. It was a notification from my banking app. Deposit received $1, $850. Payer Robert and Linda Miller. I stared at the screen. My heart didn't race anymore when I saw their names. My hands didn't shake. It was just a transaction. My lawyer had been right. The threat of a public lawsuit, one that would have entered the bank statements and the wedding theft into the public record, was enough to bring my father to the table. He had settled out of court. They had taken out a second mortgage on their house, the house that was supposed to be the symbol of their success, to pay me back. It wasn't a lump sum. They couldn't afford that after the wedding debacle. So every month a payment showed up. It felt less like money and more like proof. Every time that notification popped up, it was a tangible reminder that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter making up stories. I was a creditor, and they were finally paying their debts. I swiped the notification away and took a sip of coffee. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the night of the wedding. There had been no tearful reconciliation, no dramatic forgiveness scene. My mother had sent a few letters in the beginning, long rambling things written on floral stationery, oscillating between guilt-tripping me for breaking the family and begging me to come for Christmas so we could put this behind us. I didn't open the last two. I just put them in a box in the closet. I found that the silence which I used to fear more than anything was actually peaceful. It wasn't empty. It was spacious. I still checked on Tyler sometimes. Old habits die hard. I'd look at his Instagram from a burner account I'd made just to see if he was okay. He and Rachel were still together. They had gotten married eventually, but not at Silver Creek. There were no photos of a grand reception. Just a shot of them at a courthouse looking tired, followed by a dinner at a steakhouse. The caption read, "Just us." Perfect. I knew better. I looked at his eyes in the photo. The spark was gone. He looked heavy, burdened by the knowledge of what his parents had done to secure his happiness, and what that happiness had ultimately cost. I wondered if he looked at his wife and saw the price tag. I wondered if he looked at his parents and saw the thieves. But I didn't reach out. I didn't send a card. I realized I couldn't save him from the web he was willing to live in. I couldn't bend my life around his drama anymore. My doorbell rang, snapping me out of the digital spiral. I put the phone down and went to answer it. It was Jess, holding a grocery bag in one arm and a bottle of cheap wine in the other. Behind her was Sarah, a woman I had met in a local hiking group a few months ago. "Taco night," Jess announced, kicking off her shoes. "Sarah brought the good salsa, the kind that burns your soul." "In a good way," Sarah added, smiling. We crowded into my small kitchen. It was tight. If one person opened the fridge, everyone else had to flatten themselves against the counter, but nobody complained. We chopped vegetables and browned meat, laughing about Sarah's disastrous date from the night before and Jess's boss, who chewed with his mouth open. There was no posturing here. I didn't have to be the good one. I didn't have to earn my place by cleaning up or staying quiet. I just had to chop the tomatoes. We sat on the floor around the coffee table because I still didn't have a dining set. We ate tacos and drank the wine out of mismatched glasses. I looked at them, Jess, who had held my hand while I cried in the dark, and Sarah, who just liked me because I was funny on the trail, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the salsa. This was the American community I had read about but never really felt. It wasn't about bloodlines or family loyalty that demanded you set yourself on fire to keep others warm. It was about showing up. It was about the people who chose you over and over again, even when things were messy. Especially when things were messy. "Earth to Liz," Jess said, waving a tortilla chip in front of my face. You okay? I smiled, and I realized I meant it. Yeah, I'm good. Just thinking. Dangerous, Jess teased. I was thinking about the wedding, I admitted. The room went quiet for a second. Sarah looked at me with sympathetic eyes. She knew the broad strokes of the story. I used to be so ashamed, I said, tracing the rim of my glass. I thought that surviving the accident meant I had to be grateful just to be alive. I thought it meant keeping quiet and staying loyal to the people who saved me. But I realized that wasn't survival. That was just haunting my own life. And now, Sarah asked. Now I think survival means telling the truth, I said. And having the guts to walk away when the people you love turn out to be the ones holding the knife. Jess raised her glass. To walking away. To walking away, I echoed, clinking my glass against theirs. Later that night, after they left, the apartment was quiet again. I cleaned up the plates, washing them by hand in the sink. I dried them and put them away in the cabinet that was mine, in the kitchen that was mine. I walked back out to the balcony. The city was asleep, the streetlights humming below. I thought about the accident that had broken my body 3 years ago. I thought about the metal pins in my hip and the ache that flared up when it rained. For a long time, I hated the accident. I hated what it took from me. But standing there in the cool night air, I realized that the accident had given me something too. It had forced the truth to the surface. It had stripped away the veneer of my perfect family and showed me the rot underneath. If I hadn't been hurt, if I hadn't received that settlement, I might still be sitting at their dinner table, desperate for a crumb of approval, helping them plan a wedding I wasn't really invited to. I would still be the rock, slowly being eroded into sand. Instead, I was whole. I turned back inside and picked up a small paper bag I had bought earlier that day from the nursery down the street. I pulled out a small pothos plant in a terracotta pot. It was a resilient little thing, hard to kill, eager to grow. I set it on the windowsill right next to the glass where it would get the morning light. Welcome home, I whispered to the plant, and to myself. I looked around the room one last time. My parents still had their big house on the hill. They still had their stories, their version of events where I was the villain and they were the martyrs. They had their vintage car and their country club membership. Let them have it. Let them keep their fairy tale. I had something they couldn't spend. I had something they couldn't transfer, couldn't manage, and couldn't steal. I had my future. I had my name. And for the first time in 27 years, I had a life that finally completely belonged to me. And so Elizabeth found her peace, proving that sometimes the hardest walk is the one away from the people we love. If this story of reclaiming one's life resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more narratives like this. Let us know in the comments, would you have forgiven them? We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Ashes of Yesterday. We'll see you next time.